This is the third chapter in Scar's backstory. Scar handed the medications to Seraphin and was ready to go. She was not in a mood to talk. But he began to ask how she'd been and what she'd been up to, and she relented, finally telling him what had been going on, and she vented a little more, a lot more than she'd meant to. That, things were going well, G was doing great, and then he fell off the face of the earth. Boys! Oh! He kissed her and then went silent and hadn't responded to a single of her texts since. And she didn't want to call him. She felt too awkward doing that, but she was not happy with me right now. And ended up saying it to Seraphin, and as they were talking, her phone began to ring, and she pulled it out and saw that it was a call from G, and from me. This is weird. This isn't third person. What person is this? Anyway, but she was getting a call from me, and she said, Seraphin, I've got to take this. I've got to go. And went out the door and answered the phone as she walked back through the city. And with a little more desperation than she would like to admit, she said, Gee, where are you? What's going on? And I will say he. This is weird. And he responded, he said, I've been with Grant. Where have you been? And the call cut out at just that point. And she tried to call him back, but it said that he was out of the boundaries of service. And she knew something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong. She had to get to Grant's. She dropped a coin and launched herself into the air, getting back as fast as she could to the grove of trees that led back to Earth. She hadn't found an object to get her to Rivendell yet, but she would get one. But she got to the tree and reached out, put her hand against it, and overlay Earth and Middle Earth. And throwing herself through, she dashed through the park. And that was not fast enough. She didn't have a vehicle that she could take. And though she was on Earth, and magic is not the best thing to show off on Earth, she dropped another coin and shot herself into the air, getting as fast as she could to the lot. Because that was just the fastest way to get anywhere useful in the world of Pokemon. As she went, she worried about Darren and about G, and some part of her was comforted that there was something going on. There was a reason that G hadn't been responding. But at the same time, she was still really mad at him. But she got to the lot and had the presence of mind to check before she went through the far side. And she could sense that there were beings there. There were people waiting. And she pulled out her lightsaber, engaged it, and went through the portal. And ducked away, looking at two Profithians. She'd never been this close to Profithians before, and that was a little bit terrifying, but she dealt with worse. She spun away from them and noticed that one of them was definitely a soldier. The other did not look like it. The soldier came after her. She started running for Grant's, and the second stayed by the portal, but pulled out a blaster and started shooting at her. She knew she was not going to be able to get away from them easily, so she spun and began to swing her lightsaber at the soldier, at the second one. And he pulled out an electrified weapon of some kind and met her lightsaber with the thing that it held. And he came back to attack her, and she blocked with her lightsaber again. She glanced at his companion to see that they had a transponder of some kind and were talking to other Profithians. Reaching out with steel, she forced the transponder from his hand, and it flew across the plaza, slamming into the wall on the far side and shattering. The Profithian looked back and aimed his gun back at her, and she kept behind the Profithian's friend to keep him from shooting. She knew she wasn't going to be able to fight both of them at the same time, and so she caught the second Profithian's blade and kind of ducked underneath him, and flaring her steel again and burning pewter to strengthen her, she forced the Profithian into the air, and he lost grip on his weapon and slammed into the ground on the far side. Scar spun around and jumped at the first Profithian, slashing the blaster in half. It raised its hand and slammed a button on its belt and disappeared, traveling back to the world of darkness. The second Profithian managed to pick himself off the ground and began to run for his weapon, but Scar beat him to it, and she slashed the handle with her lightsaber. It fizzled out and died, and this Profithian stopped in his tracks, put his hands up and gave her a nod of respect before reaching down and pressing a button on his belt as well, disappearing into the world of darkness. Scar realized how heavily she was breathing, but she wasn't done. She needed to get to G. And she began to run to Grant's house, but had barely begun when a Ponita came out of a side street and ran in front of her, trying to stop her. She ran around it, but it ran in front of her again, and she jumped over and it went to stop her again, and she finally stopped and realized that G had talked about a Ponita before. And she said, "You know G?" And the Ponita nodded. And she said, "You know where he is?" And the Ponita nodded again and turned its flank toward her. And hoping she wouldn't regret it, she jumped on the Ponita's back, and it took off into the city, hopefully toward G.